This is Garis, Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 592, entitled Meeting My First Real-Life Female Masculist. Description. This flyer recounts a meeting I had with a Brazilian full professor of history who absorbed masculist ideas quickly and readily, proving herself to be a real-life and my first female masculist. Her female masculistness made me conscious that it is likely that there will be millions of female masculists who will help the masculists to mend fair the gender laws. Masculists will tell monoconscious feminists that it is in their self-interest to become biconscious, since men will reject monoconscious feminists as being repulsive due to their misandry, their callousness towards male suffering at the hands of the massive gender crimes that women commit against men. For example, the big three of manslavery, divorce, rape, and forced fathering. This Brazilian full professor is the harbinger of millions of future female masculists who will become a valuable ally of the masculist movement, who will help to make society biconscious and hence far less misandrist, feminazi, bitchy towards men. Now the flyer itself. Meeting My First Real-Life Female Masculist by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I met recently a woman with whom I had a bit of a conversation about my interests when I told her that I was a masculist. She had never heard the term before and asked me what masculists believe in. Once I got started answering her, she seemed more and more interested and kept asking me more questions. At the end of this explanatory conversation, I was left with the impression that this woman really latched onto masculist ideas and understood them, was open to them, and was empathetic to the sufferings of men at the hands of women, with their massive, decades-lasting gender crimes against men. In short, I could safely label her a female masculist. She was as much a female masculist as I am a biconscious masculist, that is, having had both my feminist and masculist consciousnesses raised, implying that I'm partly a male feminist. If I were a woman, I would be a feminist, a third-wave feminist, pushing for women to have equal real power with men in the parliaments, in the boardrooms, etc. At the end of this conversation, I felt greatly relieved and started asking myself, why? This woman was my own age, 75, very smart, a retired full university professor of history with the same status as me, had a Brazilian past, who has recently decided to settle in Australia, where her son and granddaughter are now living. She had never heard of masculism before, so I started off by explaining to her that the feminist idea that gender oppression is a one-way street is a delusion, by telling her about the big three ways that women oppress men, that is, women's manslavery, women's divorce, rape, and women's forced fathering. As I was spelling out the horrors of these three gender crimes that last decades that women commit against men, she would make comments such as, "That is very unfair," "That is unjust," and the like. She really got the masculist message, unlike my ex-girlfriend, who showed herself to be a real feminazi bigot when it came to accepting the core ideas of the masculists. The manosphere keeps painting women with a red pill brush, that is, describing women as having evolved to love men conditionally, that is, seeing men as providers of resources to vulnerable, dependent women. That is, not seeing men as valuable in themselves. For example, if a man she is getting interested in shows himself as unwilling to provide resources to her, she will cross him off. This is the core red pill message of the MGTOW, that's men going their own way, movement. MGTOW see women as having evolved this way. It is just female nature to be like this. So talking with this Brazilian woman was a breath of fresh air for me. She excited me, since it was proof that there are some women out there who will become female masculists and hence become biconscious feminists. She said that she was a feminist in the second wave sense, believing in equal rights and opportunities for women as for men, but that she was not at all a rabid, man-hating type of feminist, that is, the feminazi type, whom she felt repelled by. I told her that it will be in monoconscious feminist self-interest to become biconscious, since biconscious feminists lose their monoconscious feminazi anger at men for the ways that men oppress women, in brackets, for example, with rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, patriarchy, etc., by having their feminist anger cancelled by corresponding female masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. For example, with the big three ways mentioned above, that is, manslavery, divorce, rape, forced fathering, which are horrible gender crimes against men. This Brazilian woman was entirely open to persuasion, with no monoconscious feminist bias against the claims of the masculists, unlike the former girlfriend I had, with whom I broke up, mostly over her inability to show any empathy towards men's plight at the hands of the decades-lasting gender crimes that women inflict on men. I see my former girlfriend as a classic example of what the masculists label as an MFB, that's monoconscious feminazi bigot, that is, who has only had her feminist consciousness raised, who knows nothing of how women oppress men, and in fact worse than vice versa, who hates men for men's gender crimes against women, which is what feminism teaches women, but feminism teaches women nothing about how women oppress men. She's bigoted in the sense that she remains utterly close-minded towards bi-consciousness, refusing to accept the idea that gender oppression is a two-way street. This bigotry of hers really got on my nerves and was the major reason why we broke up. So you can imagine how refreshing it was for me to observe how readily this Brazilian full professor of history took up masculist ideas and ran with them. It made me conscious that in the coming few years there are going to be numerous female masculists, so that the feminist movement will split into two main groups, the monoconscious feminists and the biconscious feminists. I suspect that the feminist movement may even fracture into two major branches over the biconsciousness issue, with the monoconscious feminists seeing the biconscious feminists as traitors, selling out to the enemy, that is men, that is masculists, and the biconscious feminists seeing the monoconscious feminists as bigots, as callous towards the way that women oppress men. The monoconscious feminists will notice over the course of this decade that men, especially biconscious masculists, hugely prefer that their girlfriends are biconscious feminists than monoconscious feminists, since monoconscious feminists tend to be rather feminazi bitchy, since feminism is a profoundly misandrist, genocentric ideology that teaches women nothing about how women oppress men. So of course monoconscious feminists are going to be angry at men, since that is all that they hear in the context of gender politics. That is, they hear only that gender oppression is a one-way street, that it is men who are the oppressors and women who are the oppressed. Due to the genocentric nature of feminism, monoconscious feminists do not even think of the idea that women oppress men too, and in fact worse, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, making them far more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. The biconscious feminists will vote with men to amend fair the gender laws, since they understand that unless, for example, the divorce courts are made men fair, then whole populations are going to be wiped out due to the toxicity of the divorce courts, controlled by the fluffy feminists who see men as cash machines to pay for women to have babies, thus butchering one father in four, a massive gender crime by women against men. Having female masculists as allies will cause the monoconscious feminists to think twice, since it is likely that the smartest of feminists will be biconscious rather than monoconscious, since such women will have the brains and quickness of mind to comprehend rapidly the very powerful arguments of the masculists and see that the masculists are right. For example, it's very difficult to argue against the masculist idea that it was men who gave women science-based medicine, so that women now have a life expectancy of 85 years. So with the male inventions of the pill, household gadgets, etc., women have a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral duty to FIP up, to become financially independent persons, by getting career competent educations so that they can be FIPs as adults and not expect fluffy style to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him and divorce raping him, making her hated by the masculists, who consider such women vermin, to be effectively exterminated by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, forced to rot on the shelf, dying a slow, miserable death, since no man will go near them, who spit in their faces for being manslaving, divorce raping parasites. Men don't want relationships with misandrist, male dumping, feminazi cunts. Such women are repulsive to men, so men ignore them due to these women's misandry and hatred of men. However, biconscious women are entirely a different kettle of fish. Biconscious feminists, who are partly female masculists, are sympathetic to men due to their biconsciousness. They readily understand how women oppress men too, so are empathetic to men and to how men are oppressed by women, and in fact worse than vice versa. Biconscious masculists far prefer to have relationships with biconscious feminists than with shitty, bigoted, monoconscious feminists whom masculists force to rot on the shelf. Over the course of this decade, as masculist and MGTOW ideas spread and spread across the planet, millions of monoconscious feminists will notice that their monoconscious male feminist boyfriends are dumping them in large numbers, and then start up relationships with biconscious feminists. This pattern will become very evident to monoconscious feminists and will motivate them to become biconscious feminists themselves, if they are to keep their boyfriends, once their boyfriends learn about masculist and MGTOW ideas and become biconscious masculists, then seeing the monoconscious views of their girlfriends as bigoted. So these boyfriends become disgusted and then dump them. Being dumped by their boyfriends will be such a painful experience that millions of monoconscious feminists will convert themselves into becoming biconscious feminists purely to avoid a second boyfriend from dumping them for the same reason. Thus, over time, the proportion of feminists who are biconscious will grow and grow, and the proportion of feminists who remain monoconscious will decrease and decrease. Thus, the openness towards masculist and MGTOW ideas that I experienced with that Brazilian woman will be repeated in millions of cases in the coming few years, and that in turn will change the nature of the whole gender political landscape. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Prof. Hugo de Garis at yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 590 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website.